14 years. For 14 years I've played this game. That's longer than some Zoomers have been alive. In those years, I've been part of some of WoW's greatest moments.
No king rules forever, my son.
I see only darkness before me.
And some of its most terrible failures.
Burnage!
I've persisted throughout all the years. I've killed demons and gods. I've created legends and destroyed empires. But all things must end. 14 years worth of time spent, and now I've walked away. I don't know if there's anything left for me.
But to waste another 14 years doing it all over again. So if you're like me or many of the other longtime subscribers who have finally divested themselves of WoW in the wake of the disaster that is Battle for Azeroth, you've probably considered what you're going to do now with all of that free time you have. Of course, you could spend it doing something useful like exercising, learning a new language, or teaching yourself a trade, or instead you could go right back to whiling away those precious remaining moments of your fleeting lifespan hammering away buttons on a keyboard in yet another digital Skinner box. The purpose of this guide is to explain many of the essential parts of Final Fantasy XIV in terms that a former WoW player can more easily understand. Largely, this guide has been informed by my time finding parallels in many of the experiences in playing both games. So, put on that aggro t-shirt, grab your bottle of Shasta, and get ready to embark on your quest to the bottom of the endless time sink that is Final Fantasy XIV. Chapter 1! Character creation! So you've started the game and you've entered into a realm reborn. Reborn from what? Well, we'll get to that later. The first thing you need to know is that the data center you pick will determine who you can play with. As of patch 4.4, the game has limited cross-realm functionality between all the servers on a data center, and most notably the ability to make cross-realm parties for raids and dungeon content. Your server still matters for guilds, called free companies, the auction house, called the market board, player housing, and a lot of other things. So if you know what choice you want to make or have friends already located somewhere, it will at least pay off to know what data center they're on so you can play together. Ideally, you'd want to be on their server, but if you are not at least on the same data center, you will not be able to interact at all. In creating your character, there are no racial abilities in this game, so besides aesthetics, it doesn't really matter. The starting attributes you're given are also equally as pointless, so feel free to play with whatever suits you.
I don't know if I can condense pure hatred into 3 seconds.
Classes in Final Fantasy are called jobs, and while your starting job will determine what major city you started and what equipment you start with, besides that it does not determine much else. One character can play any job in Final Fantasy, and besides being in an instance or combat, you can swap jobs at will so long as you've done the intro quest for that job. So if you started as an archer in Gridania and wanted to swap to a marauder, you can just travel to Linza La Minza, do the Marauder intro quest, and get handed an axe to become a Marauder. You can ultimately unlock every job in the game and level them all to max level if you care. Besides variety, however, in the current state of the game, leveling any one job will not give you any stat-based or ability-based cross-job performance advantage in another job. A few more important things to note when picking a job. All of the starting jobs change into advanced jobs at level 30. Effectively, all it means is a different job name and unlocking some additional skills. Marauder turns into Warrior, Gladiator turns into Paladin, Pugilist into Monk, and so forth. The only exception for this starting class is Arcanist, which turns into Scholar or Summoner, and both Scholar and Summoner share a job level, meaning if you get XP on Summoner, it also levels Scholar at the same time. There are also a handful of jobs that are unlockable throughout the game if you meet certain requirements. Rogue is unlockable at level 10 and turns into Ninja. Dark Knight, Machinist, and Astrologian start at level 30 and require a level 50 character, as well as owning and unlocking the Heavensward expansion content. You can also unlock Samurai and Red Mage. They start at level 50 and require a level 50 character, as well as owning and unlocking the Stormblood expansion content. The last and most important thing to mention about jobs is that there is no specialization or spec inside a job. White Mage, for example, does not have a DPS spec and can never queue for a DPS role in a raid or instance. paladin does not have a healing spec and can never queue for anything except a tank role. Your job determines your role and what you can queue for, and you are locked in. So, as it concerns the classes and their roles, Marauders and Gladiators are tanks and turn into Warriors and Paladins. You can also unlock Dark Knight later if you want a tank. Conjurer begins the game as the only healer class sub 30 and turns into White Mage. Although Arcanist begins as DPS, it can turn into Scholar at level 30 to heal, and the unlockable Astrologian begins at 30 and is also a healer. All other classes begin as DPS and remain DPS of varying flavors. Lancer and Pugilist are melee DPS and turn into Dragoon and Monk respectively. Also as melee DPS, Rogue can be unlocked by reaching level 10 in any job class, and it turns into Ninja. Samurai is unlockable for melee DPS starting at level 50. Archer begins the game as ranged physical DPS and turns into Bard at 30. Additionally, Machinist can be unlocked as ranged physical DPS and begins at level 30. Magic DPS can begin the game as Thaumaturge for Black Mage, or Arcanist to turn into Summoner. Also, Red Mage can be unlocked and starts at level 50. Chapter 2! Transport and Travel! Alright, characters created, you've watched the intro cutscene and you're the Warrior of Light. Or maybe not, it's complicated. Anyways, for whatever reason, you can teleport using big crystals called Aetherite. There are two abilities you'll see on your bar, Teleport and Return. Return will port you back directly to whatever Aetherite node you've registered as your home node, just like your Hearthstone. Teleport will let you pick from a list of any Aetherite nodes you've unlocked for a small sum of gil, that's gold. Just as a matter of convenience, you should make it a point to unlock every Aetherite node you come across for later use. Big cities like the one you start in will have one big Aetherite node for the city and a lot of smaller ones you can interact with for in-town travel. I highly recommend looking at the map and taking the time to walk around the city to initially unlock these, because it will save an immense amount of time later on when you may need to get somewhere. If you don't see anybody mounted up in the city, it's because you can't use mounts in the major cities, so again, it's very important to have those Aetherite nodes done so you can port around for trade or questing purposes. Speaking of mounts, you can unlock your first mount at level 20 through a quest. It's called My Little Chocobo. You'll need some Grand Company seals for this, which I'll explain later, but for now, just know that before level 20, you're going to be walking. And speaking of walking, Sprint is an ability that everyone gets. It used to cost TP to activate, but it doesn't anymore, so feel free to use it whenever it's off cooldown and you want to run. This includes in combat, where you can use it for additional mobility or just to run away. There are NPCs called Chocobo Keeps in certain smaller settlements out in the different zones. These are kind of like Flight Pass, and if the place you're going does not have an Aetherite node, it may be faster to take a higher Chocobo if you don't have a mount yet. Of course, even if you do have a mount, sometimes you just want to put the damn thing on autopilot for a while. Lastly, in regards to travel, you will be restricted to your main starting city and the zones surrounding it until you hit level 15 and progress the main story quest. All it means functionally for now is that if there is a job trainer in a city outside one of the ones in your starting city, you will not be able to pick up that job until you progress the main story and unlock airship travel between the cities. Once you do, however, you can just use the Aetherite to port to them or back to your starting city whenever you want. Chapter 3 Important Things for Early Levels. While many different NPC vendors in WoW can repair, there's usually only one dedicated repair NPC per settlement unless you're in a big city. They can be found under this marker. The auction house in Final Fantasy XIV is called the Market Board, and they can be found in any major city. Auction items can be bought from the board and are placed directly in your inventory. But buying an item that's being listed in a different city may incur a small tax. Additionally, to place items on the market board, you will need a retainer. Retainers can be unlocked after progressing the main story quest past a prerequisite given at level 17 called Scions of the Seventh Dawn. After completing this, you should be able to talk to a retainer vocate NPC in any major city that's usually located in the middle of the city's market district. You can make 2 retainers for free, and once you've made one, you can summon it from any summoning bell you might find out in the world. In the beginning, retainers act primarily as your bank to store items and as a way to list things on the market board. At level 17, you can also unlock the ability to send your retainers on their own quests called ventures, and these can eventually become extremely profitable at higher levels. Another important thing for new characters is at level 15 you will unlock the Halls of the Novice, which can be found by looking on the map of the major cities for this icon. This is the tutorial for your role, and while you probably already know more or less what you need to do if you're a tank, healer, or DPS, completing these Halls of the Novice will get you some gear for your level, as well as one other extremely important item, the brand new ring. This will increase XP gains under level 30 by 30%. This will not only help you for the next 15 levels of the job you're currently on, but it will also be extremely useful if you ever plan on leveling another job. The most important quest markers to look for will be the main story quest, or MSQ. These can also be tracked on a useful little tracker on the top left of your screen by default. Besides the MSQ, there will be blue quest markers with a plus symbol on them. This indicates that completing the quest will unlock something, whether it's a new job class, instance, or even unlocking in-game modes like PvP. Lastly, there are normal quests or side quests. These will sometimes lead to some gear for your level, but will often just be present if you need extra experience to progress the main story quest or to help level alternate jobs. The main story quest, or MSQ, is unique to Final Fantasy XIV, and it specifically awards extra experience compared to normal quests. It also progresses, go figure, the overall story of the game, so there's tons of lore and cutscenes in there as well. As you work through the MSQ, you unlock all sorts of content. It should also be mentioned that there is plenty of post-game content that gets added with each patch, so this post-game content is connected to the MSQ. So for example, if you're working on the Stormblood 4.0 MSQ, you will need to complete all of it before you can do anything connected to the 4.1 MSQ continuation, and then the 4.2 content, and so on. In the end, of course, you should do whatever makes you happy in the game, but just know that the progress on the MSQ gates a lot of content.
Chapter 4! Abilities and Combat!
Now, if you played WoW and you've come directly to Final Fantasy XIV, you're going to notice that FF14's combat feels very, very slow. That's because the GCD in FF14 is 2.5 seconds. 2.5 seconds to a WoW player who's playing a class with generally faster inputs like Rogue pretty much feels like an eternity, although in FF14, there's some key gameplay differences that offset this longer interval. The first difference is especially once you hit max level, you find that you generally use a much wider range of skills across the character. Furthermore, all jobs have a variety of off-GCD skills you'll be expected to regularly use. To that end, most jobs end up weaving off-GCD skills between on-GCD skills throughout each 2.5 second GCD. So in many cases you have something closer to a 1.3 second time between inputs, which is comparable to WoW. Skills are broken down into three categories: weapon skills, spells, and abilities. Weapon skills and spells are on the same 2.5 second main GCD, while abilities have their own cooldowns and are generally off the GCD. Most of playing the game optimally amounts to rotating through your weapon skills or spells on the GCD while hitting off GCD ability skills between them. I want to stress here regarding the playstyle and feel of FF14 in comparison to WoW is that when you first start out and you don't have many skills to play with, the game is going to feel extremely tedious and slow. I would keep in mind, however, that it gets much better once you start unlocking your full kit. Until you hit max level, remember that your experience with the abilities you have access to at, say, level 30 is nothing like your gameplay experience at level 70. In addition to whatever skills and ability your job gets, you will also have access to a pool of abilities based on your role: tank, healer, melee DPS, physical ranged, and magical. Formerly you had to pick which one of these you took, but now you can just take all of them, and most of them are either critical to your role, like a tank's rampart, or extremely useful for party synergy, like a bard or machinist refresh. As it regards combat specifically, FF14 relies heavily on telegraphed attacks. These will usually be little orange shapes on the ground, although they can take other forms as well. These are self-explanatory, although there is one important thing to stress. The animation for these attacks is more or less irrelevant. If you're standing in a telegraph when an ability goes off, you will be hit, regardless of whether or not it looks like you're standing in the animation when it plays. Conversely, once the telegraph ends, you can feel free to jump immediately back into that space if it appears you're jumping into an attack animation. This is not an absolute rule because some attacks do not have telegraphs, so it's hard to say precisely when they begin and end in comparison to their animation. For the ones that do, you're safe to move back in once the telegraph is gone. You do not have to wait for the animation to play out. There are also a variety of telegraph animations that will intuitively display what kind of response you will need to give in a certain situation. A spot with circles pulsing outwards will mean an AoE attack to get away from, as it will do more damage the closer you are to the source. There are a few others, but you'll see through a little practice that they're easy to pick up on once you see them a few times.
Chapter 5, Leveling and Progression.
There's a specific kind of quest marker in the game that has these little cards and an exclamation point called levy quests. Levy quests are kind of like repeatable daily quests, although you can build up an allotment of levy quests and spend them when you want. These quests are somewhat procedurally generated and tailored to whatever level you set them at within a given range. They give all kinds of rewards and can be useful to bridge the gap in XP if you've been focusing hard on the main story and don't have enough XP to progress. They're also very useful to level trade skills. At level 17, you can unlock Palace of the Dead, or POTD, in a town called Quarry Mill. POTD is a separate area that has its own unique XP system, and it is an extremely easy way to grind up experience and test out the later levels of your job. It's probably the most time-efficient XP farm in the game for leveling, although the real limitation is how much monotony you can tolerate after doing it 100 times. At level 30, you can unlock a Chocobo Companion. I strongly recommend you do this when proceeding to the main story quest, as this Chocobo can become invaluable when soloing. You can spec them out for tanking, healing, or DPS, and they do make questing alone much easier, not to mention just looking cool. Through the MSQ, you will eventually unlock the Grand Companies, and these are basically one of 3 factions in-game representative of the 3 major nations, Giridania, Ulda, and Limsa Lominsa. Technically, it doesn't really matter which company you join, and you can look up the differences elsewhere, but it's important to note that once you have them unlocked, to try and grab promotions when you're leveling so you don't cap out on company seals. Some of the promotions will require you to complete a Grand Company hunting log, and if possible, that's something you want to try and do while you're in the right zones leveling in the first place. It's important to mention that there are some features such as individual player housing that cannot be accessed without first at least being second lieutenant in your Grand Company. Speaking of logs, FF14 has a log for just about everything: hunting, gathering, crafting, and so much more. Completing these entries will get you bonus XP, company seals, and more, so again, doing them while they're worth doing at the right level can speed you along while leveling.
Chapter 6, Crafting and Other Stuff.
This is just a refugee guide, so I'm not going to get too deep into crafting here, because FF14 has an extremely deep crafting system compared to WoW. The quick is, each crafting profession is its own job with its own levels and skills. There are many unique things to do for a dedicated crafter in this game, and talking about them all would take almost as much time as explaining progression for the combat classes. Crafting has daily quests, job quests, tokens, reputation, gear, stats, and skills, all specifically for crafters. Mining, botany, and fishing are the 3 gathering professions, and alchemist, armorer, blacksmith, carpenter, culinarian, goldsmith, leatherworker, and weaver are the production professions. All the crafting professions are interconnected, meaning something like a blacksmith will always need certain materials from a carpenter, goldsmith, or other professions. You can level just one of these up if you're going to get into crafting, but ultimately it pays to level most of them up at the same time, although this can be slow going unless you've already got a decent amount of gil in the bank. Crafting specialized, high-quality items at the top end of the game is extremely profitable, and it can produce gear that isn't too far behind the current tier raid gear. In certain situations, crafted gear may be better for some jobs' raid gear, because crafted gear may have different stat distributions or more gem slots, that's materia in FF14, for customization. Even if you're not crafting in-game gear, there's potions, food, furniture, and all kinds of other items that sell for very good money on the market. Speaking of gear, transmogs in FF14 are called glamours. You'll need glamour prisms to apply the image of one item onto another, and you'll need a glamour dispeller to remove the image if you don't overwrite one glamour with another. The glamour dresser you'll find in inns or personal housing will allow you to save glamour plates, which are like saved transmog outfits. Just know that the glamour stays with the item until it's overwritten or dispelled, and you can't glamour cross jobs unless the jobs share an armor set. There is a lot more I could talk about or more detail I could get into, but this information here is just to get you started. For me personally, after spending 14 years with the same MMO, it's been pretty refreshing to try something new just beyond dabbling. There are loads of other guides and resources out there on any specifics you might want to learn, and I'll link a few in the comments. Whether you plan to stay or just try it out while waiting out Battle for Azeroth, I hope you enjoy your time with Final Fantasy XIV.